Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And tonight we have Nickolas Butler going to be talking about his killer new book, Godspeed. And Nick very kindly signed a batch of books for us. And I'll go ahead and put a link to the book in the comments field. And those of you watching on Facebook, if you have questions for Nick and Ace Atkins, our friend who's going to be doing the interview today with Barbara. Here's Ace's brand new book, The Heathens. Go ahead and put them in the comments field and I will be happy to ask them. And Barbara is tuning in from her home office. So Barbara, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. It was nice of you to hold up The Heathens, but I think we actually sold out of our autographed copies, didn't we?
We did, but we still have the book.
The book. So Patrick pilfered one from some unlucky customer just
I
to
did.
show it. Right. If we're actually pushed, we could send Ace some more books to sign. So don't feel shy. We can always do that. So Mr. Butler's book, which I truly loved and which Mr. Atkins also loves, is our notable new fiction book of the month for July, which is a category we have at the Poison Pen that does not involve crime. Although I'm not sure, Nick, that we could truly say that there are not criminal elements in this glorious book. But anyhow, that's what we did. So Ace, you and I both agree it's terrific. So I'm going to sit back here and let you tell everybody why you think it's wonderful.
Absolutely. Nick, it's great to see you. It's great to finally connect. Wish we were doing this in person, but this is a fun thing to set up. And of course, one of the best bookstores in the country. So Barbara, thanks for hosting all of this. This has been an unusual thing because Nick, I read this book last year. I think it was the end of last year or the beginning of this year. So I had to go back and I was rereading portions and getting back into it. But man, this thing, you know, I had the really kind of the luck of reading this book, not knowing a damn thing about it. I knew your previous work, and it was highly recommended by an editor that I very much respect. And so I just got the book, and I had no idea what this novel was going to be about, which is really, kind of a lucky thing for me. And this thing drew me in immediately. And can you tell us, let's talk a little bit about the premise of the book, which is so engaging from the get-go. So tell us a little bit about how this book starts off and the premise of this story, which I think is just genius.
Yeah. Well, first off, Barbara, thanks so much for hosting the event. And Ace, I've told you this in a message, but I was reading your books from the beginning of your career, and you would never remember this, but I sent you an email when I was working at the Canterbury bookstore in Madison, Wisconsin. So I'm just really happy for this moment because when you're,
there were at least 5 people who read those books. So you're one of 5 of 6 people who read. Barbara, you two were one of the few that read those early books. So thanks to you both.
And Patrick, and Nick is clearly starstruck, just as we have been since Crossroad Blues. I mean,
man.
How long has it been, Ace? I mean, we've been doing this together for how many years now?
Well, it can't be that long. I'm only 28. So
well, I understand that, and I'm only 33, right? But nonetheless, when did you publish Crossroad Blues?
I was only 20. I was 27. Oh.
No, what year?
Well, what year? 1997.
Okay, so since then we've been doing this. Sorry, I interrupted, but it was just
no, it's all right. Yeah, so anyway, it just means a lot to me. When I was working at the Canterbury, authors would come in, and I always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't really know how people went about doing it. And so it was important for me to just observe writers and have contact with them. And I loved your books back then. I love them now. Where did this come from? So back in 2014, my wife and I built a house south of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and a family friend came over one day to look at the house, and he started talking about another project that he was working on not so far away from us, a multi-million-dollar house, which is a lot in our neck of the woods. And they slipped behind on their construction deadline, and the homeowner got everybody together on the crew and was going to offer them small 5-figure bonus each person if they could finish the house in the next 3 weeks. And my buddy turned to me and said, Nick, if we had all the meth in the world, we couldn't have finished that house in 3 weeks. And I thought, that seems like a really good idea for a book. So I just began asking questions about like, well, why would the homeowner have that sort of deadline? What kind of person has that sort of disposable income where they're just handing out 5-figure bonuses? My friend and the rest of his crew didn't accept the offer, but I get to ask the question, well, what if you did accept the offer? And what if you fell behind on that deadline? And what if you resorted to meth to stay up all night long to keep working? And what if other bad things sort of happen? So that's really where it came about, was just sort of asking questions about like, what if this thing had actually happened? And then it became a really interesting way to, examine what's going on in America right now. I wrote this book a couple years back, but the housing market has only gotten more insane. So.
Well, I think one of the things that I found so unusual about this book, and I'm sure critics have noticed the same thing, is, the things you're talking about as far as meth addiction and construction deadlines and gritty details. And, it sounds like this is it is a dark book, but you expect it to be a slow paced kind of story that you get into, but it's not. This book reads, it's not a thriller. There is crime in it. I don't know if I'd call it a crime novel. It's just a book. It's about 3 guys. It's about, as you said, friendship. But when did you feel that did the pacing just take over, or was this something you were consciously aware of, that you wanted this novel to really move? Because like I said, I picked up this book back in January or maybe December, and I thought I'd read a few chapters and, read a little bit later. And I just got engrossed. I read it like in two days. I felt the same urgency that your characters did. Did you know that from the beginning, or did the story take over?
Well, so one of the, I know you are a prolific writer. You write a lot and you must write pretty quick. For me, this is as quick as I've ever written a book before. I basically put myself on a similar deadline to what the guys were under, but I was also promoting my newest book at that time. So I was traveling all around the country, driving all around the upper Midwest, promoting that book. I also have 2 young kids. And so it was just this like frantic kind of race to the deadline, which I think helped to kind of achieve that sort of atmosphere. And I wanted the book to have a little bit of a desperate sort of emotional quality, and when you hit those points where the guys are doing meth, I wanted you to like zip along and feel like your heart was racing too much. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question exactly.
No, I think so. And there's also an aspect to this. It's not a crime novel. It's not. I don't think I would classify it as a crime novel. But there is a mystery. There's a mystery that is pulling you through. And this woman, Gretchen, that has offered this essentially deal with the devil. We don't know why she's doing this. Why does she need this house built so quickly? Why does she have all these very specific orders? Why is she taunting these guys? Is she sadistic? So tell us about, tell us about her. Let's talk about Gretchen, and then we'll go back and talk about the guys who anchor this story. So you're talking about a person with means. So who is this woman who offers this deal to these guys?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never had other than my writing career, I've never had a good job. All through my teens and 20s, I had shitty, dangerous jobs that didn't pay any money. And so that sort of explains, the affection for the construction workers. But I'm married to a very successful, smart, sexy attorney. And early in her career, she worked for a big corporate firm. And we sort of had a look at like what that lifestyle was like. And to us, part of it was like, she was working with great people, but making so much money that they couldn't even spend it, and also their whole days were sort of broken down into 12-minute increments or 15-minute increments. So when I began thinking about like, well, who's the kind of person who has this sort of disposable income and And why would they put the guys through it? I guess I began thinking about, her experiences in that firm, and just thinking about like time became really important to me, like the guys are constantly thinking about time, but she's also, and I don't want to give anything away, but she's thinking about time desperately too.
So when you
Yeah.
started writing, when you gave yourself this limit of 5 to 6 months, this was an exercise to increase the pressure and the narrative structure in the book to give it a sense of urgency. So you
Yeah.
put this pressure on yourself so you could be empathetic towards these guys. I know, I don't know if you know Megan Abbott, our friend, Barbara and I's good friend, wonderful writer, but she did kind of a similar exercise when she wrote a book called Queen Pin, because she wanted to feel the same pressure as the pulp writers of the period she was writing about to really get into it. So
Wow.
these guys, tell me about these guys, Cole, Teddy, Bart, good buddies. This is the friendship that anchors everything. And of course, everything goes very well with them. There's no conflict at all. They get along great. I don't want to spoil anything. They build the dream house and it's lovely. And there's a rainbow at the end. I thought it was a little bit over the top, the rainbow, but it's just nothing bad happens. Well, tell us about these guys that, why do they accept this challenge that seems to be insane?
Yeah. Well, they're three friends. They're from Eastern Utah, and they make their way to Jackson kind of in their early 20s, and they work, the jobs I suppose that I would have had in my 20s. And then they form a construction company, and they're basically getting slowly priced out of their own town. They're doing like crappy construction jobs, but they can't claw ahead. They can't buy a house. Like Teddy's a family guy. He's got a wife and a number of daughters. And Cole is ambitious. He wants to be respected within the community. And what they don't know about their buddy Bart is that he's just looking for a way out.
Yeah.
So they get this offer, and it's their chance. It's their shot at fulfilling, the American dream.
Right.
And
can I intervene here and say something? One of the reasons I was so attracted to this book is that we've had experience with communities like this. One of my husband's relatives built Aspen, and in the process of building Aspen, wound up gentrifying it to the point that real people couldn't afford to live there. And then Santa Fe is another example where Rob Ace spent 30 years and watched it become, between Californians and Texans, just blew it up so that people who had hourly jobs, part-time work and so forth, couldn't afford to live in Santa Fe anymore. The entire thing gentrified. And strangely enough, since I was just there for 2 weeks, that passes. Some of these communities, are hugely in vogue and all of this happens. And then the the wealthy crowd moves on and leaves behind a different situation, but that's not what you're writing about. But 2 years ago, when we decided to take a driving tour of Wyoming, CJ Bucks, whom Ace and I certainly both know, arranged for us to stay in a club in Jackson. So I mean, we got to Jackson, and we could both see that it was happening in Jackson as it had happened in Santa Fe. It's attracting, it's an in place, there's tons of money. It's attracting that whole kind of glitzy crowd. And someday it may move on. But you're absolutely right that these guys, are becoming fish out of water in a hurry in Jackson, because with big money pouring in and fancier homes and the whole bit, they're not really able to compete with that.
Yeah. I'll tell you a quick story. Like, two friends of mine, a married couple, just had their house burned down. And so they got their insurance check, and now they're looking for another house, and they had the opportunity to look, wherever they want in the country. So husband flies out to Missoula, Montana, looks at houses for, about 2 weeks, finds one. And the agent he was working with said, "You got to put in an offer that's I'm thinking 76,000 more than asking if you're going to get this house, which ironically, I think is the exact sum of money that Teddy has to put in a scene in this book, but whatever. So they put in an offer 76,000 more than asking in Missoula, Montana. They're not even one of the top 3 bidders for that house. They're just a middle-class family. They went back to Wisconsin, looked at another sort of nice community, Bayfield, Wisconsin, and same thing, another bidding war, had to put in an offer 86,000 more than asking in Wisconsin, and they didn't get it. And this is a family with some amount of means, you know, a pretty middle-class family. And it's just, you know, I think right now, like the stock market's still going gangbusters. The housing market is going gangbusters. So you think that things seem healthy in America, and you forget that a huge portion of America is like one paycheck away, you know, and that's who the characters, that's who the guys in the construction firm are.
So
Before I retire from this, let me just add this, that we're talking about Jackson as a community, but there's also an enormous, increasingly large number of people who don't want to build in a community. They want some piece of the wilderness, you know, and that means that they are willing to go out there and they are risking fire and they are risking all kinds of things in order to, you know, it's kind of like the British country houses or something is what we're seeing. People with money symbolically want to have some kind of amazing mansion, but they're causing all kinds of havoc because they're invading the wilderness, they're white, you know, and animals are having to scramble, all kinds of things. So it's a misnomer to say this is all about Jackson. Jackson's where your guys are, but the house is not in Jackson.
You're absolutely right about that. Yeah, the house is situated, well, the house is really situated like 45 minutes southeast of Jackson, and it's based on a real landscape. My family and I camped in Bridger Teton National Forest outside of Jackson, where there's this beautiful hot springs. And so one of the other impetuses for the book was just thinking about this idea of the privatization of public lands. Yeah. And, you know, we were at this public hot springs and it was fantastic and cheap. It cost like $8 to get into the hot springs, and we could camp for free in the national forest. But I started thinking like, well, what if some plutocrat could buy this? You know, so then you have these, you know, and it's happening all over the place. You know, people are just, well, you know, if you've got enough money.
How did you get, you know, there's obviously, when you read this, I think any writer who's been in this business can feel the parallels between being a novelist and constructing something and being up against a deadline, and the parallels of driving yourself crazy. Of course, it's not crystal meth for me, it's coffee, but it's still, you know, the driving force behind it. But how did you get into the mindset of the construction workers to get the details right? I mean, I don't know if you, I don't know but it seems like everything you obviously made a great effort to really show people building a house. So who was your go-to person to learn these details?
Well, I mean, I watched the construction of our own house every day. So I was down here terrorizing the construction workers, many of whom were, you know, townies like me. They'd gone to the same high school I'd gone to. Also handy to ask those dudes drug-related questions here and there.
Right, that's where you get the best detail. You know, that's what I tell young writers all the time. They're afraid to talk to people. And, you know, my whole thing is don't, you know, the adage of MFA programs is write what you know. And I say, write what you find out. And that's terrific, man, to like talking to people and talking to guys on construction sites. I bet you got so many details that you would have never thought about had you not opened yourself up to that.
Yeah. I mean, there's you know, there's like a pecking order in construction. Which I hadn't really been exposed to before, but you know, Finnish carpenters, at least in my experience, they all look like you. They're all handsome dudes, you know, they're fit, you know, they're competent, they show up on time and do the work, and then you start to kind of work your way down. You know, the electricians are high up that pecking order and the plumbers are high. But then near the bottom is like the guys working sheetrock and painting,
Yeah.
and they look like they just got out of jail because maybe they did just get out of jail, and they'll tell you about all their divorces and so that was interesting to me. You know, there was one guy who worked on our job site who literally anything I said or asked him, he would, and I'm going to swear here, I apologize, but he would just say, "Fuck yeah," every time. That's all he said. Fuck yeah.
Barbara, I know you're shocked by the profanity. I know that you are just stalwart and not listening to any profanity. So I know you're greatly offended.
I was thinking about painters because traditionally painters are all supposed to be completely crazy from, you know, the paint and the fumes and so
Right.
forth.
I had
Maybe
a- I
not
had-
today when, you know, paint is a cleaner thing, but as I understood it in construction, you know, they were the guys you really had to look out for because they were
Right.
either juiced or, you know, slightly off their rockers.
We
Yeah.
had we had a crew of painters over at my house recently working on a deck, and I just, you know, being a writer, you can't help but eavesdrop a little bit. And as they were talking, one of them said, who's running the crew, she said, "God, I hate to let that guy go." She said he got off drugs and he just wasn't as good of a painter once he got off drugs. He was actually much better and did a better job. And I wish he had just, you know, not gone off drugs soon. I was like, boy, I'm filing that way. I'm using that for a book sometime. But
Yeah.
those details. But there's a real humanity to this book. There is some humor. It's some rough edge to this story. And again, it's hard to explain. Like we start talking about the meth epidemic, and we start talking about, you know, people that are, you know, down and out. But there is this sense of wanting to accomplish something. There is this drive to it. And what this really reminded me of, and I don't know if this was in your mind at all, but it reminded me so much of the classic film, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. And it reminded me going up into the mountains, finding, and of course, you know, anytime I get into a business relationship with somebody or think about getting into something, I always remember all the lessons I've learned from the Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Things do not go well for these guys. And it's so hard to talk about this book, man, because there's so many spoilers. But it's not just them turning things in and out. There is death. There is dismemberment. There is madness. There is turmoil. There is everything. And it just reminded me so much of the hope and promise of the treasure going up the mountain and then seeing how everything devolved. Did you have any of that stuff in mind, or did you have any films or books that influenced you into writing this kind of story?
Yeah. So the book is, you guys won't be able to see this, but the book is dedicated to B. Traven.
Oh, I didn't know what I did. You know, I missed that part maybe when I read it in Galley. I didn't see that part.
No, but yeah,
Oh.
I'm Treasure of Sierra Madre is a huge touchstone for me.
Wow.
Just a class. Well, you know, his writing hasn't really aged for me. I mean, that book has got to be, I think, 100 years old now. But the first chapter of it is about a guy who's down on his luck. I think he's sleeping on a park bench.
Yeah.
You know, he's sort of making fun of people that are walking by with more money in the park, and I just so yes, I was definitely thinking about that book. I'm also a huge fan of Scott Smith's book, A Simple Plan. You know, which it's so deceptively, I suppose it's deceptively simple, but it's a remarkable book. It just keeps putting the characters in positions where they can make the right move, but they constantly make the wrong move, you know.
Well, Nick, the books that I'm on, and the thing that I loved about your books so much when I read it is what I'm really drawn to. I don't necessarily like the twisty plot-driven books where the characters are paper thin and essentially they're just chess pieces for the author to move around and tell this very, you know, complicated, convoluted story. Your story, in like A Simple Plan, the story is somewhat simple. It's building the house. There is a mystery to it. There's a mystery. Will they succeed or will they fail? But it's all about the characters. And these guys are just terrifically so unique and so well drawn and so specific to what happens in the story is who they are as people. And I love that. So again, if we could talk about, let's, if you don't mind, tell us a little about Bart, because Bart, I think, is one of the more, he's kind of the wild card, very interesting character, and kind of the guy that, you want to be friends with. He's fun to hang out with, but he might, punch you after the third or fourth beer. Is that right?
Yeah, that seems fair to say. Yeah. Yeah, Bart's a fun character to write. I mean, he's of the three guys in the construction firm, he's the most unpredictable. He's had a history of a drug history and a history of violence. He's probably got the quickest temper of the group, and what his partners don't know is that his knees are killing him. Which is a sort of a simple detail, but in real life, if your back hurts you or your knees hurt you, it's something that you think about every day. And then you think about being a construction worker and probably not having the sort of resume where you can do any other job. I mean, he's looking for any sort of way out. So when they get this deal, he doesn't really tell his partners, but like the goal for him is to quit and to go to Panama, and like he imagines himself being a bartender or something. Panama is a detail because I used to work as a coffee roaster, so I would take trips down to Latin America and source coffee, and Panama is my favorite spot. But yeah, man, he was a fun character to write.
And I think that's what propels the story. Again, it's so fun and so interesting, but the details of the guys and their friendship and that core, again, going back, is that the most important thing in this story is the relationship between these three guys? Is that everything for you?
I think I don't know how to answer your question exactly, except to say that in every one of my books, I guess I'm interested in male friendship. It's not something that I like set out to write about every time, like, gee, I'm going to write another novel about male friends.
Yeah.
But the way I think about it is most of our relationships are defined by money or sex or obligation or legality or business or something like that. And I'm just really fascinated by friendship because it's, you're just getting together with somebody else because it's fun.
You mentioned, Nick, in the press materials in an interview that you did, you talked about that you felt like that it did have a Western component. And I did have kind of a hard time wrapping my head around where was the Western component to this. But I find, other than geographically, but for me, that is the most Western component, is the bond that these three guys have, making it through this adversity, or not. I'm not going to say anything that happens, but their journey is that kind of code of honor or bond that they have to make sure that they will kill themselves rather than fail or to fail each other. And that to me seems like a very wagon drive kind of roundup kind of story that could have been thematically the same in a Western.
Well, I don't disagree with that, Ace. I think you're right, but I'm going to introduce a different perspective here, if I may. I read this book in one gulp, which, as you know, Ace, I can do in an afternoon.
Sure.
And I was driven through it because I couldn't figure out where it was going.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you about the friendship and how interesting these guys were, but I kept thinking, where the heck is this story going? I was fascinated with it, and I wanted to read it right through to the end. So
there is, and that's that mystery component, the mystery component of why. What is this deadline for? Why?
Well, it's a challenge, basically. I mean, it is indeed, throwing down the gauntlet and seeing if these guys will crumble or whether they will succeed. Unfortunately, we can't talk about the ending. I mean, I don't want to spoil the book, but the other thing I thought was really interesting, you're right about the guys and the friendship is the core in the whole bit, but I think the woman is really fascinating. Now, I'm a lawyer who read the law.
What do you know? What do you know about very strong women that have a sadistic streak? What do you know about? I don't think you know anything.
Well, let's bring Patrick in and he can talk about that. But seriously, what's happened in the legal profession is really interesting. I read the law, and that was back in the 70s, the late 70s. And it wasn't all about billable hours. It wasn't all about, 12-minute increments and all the rest of it. It was much more service oriented. You really wanted to represent your client, and you wanted to give them a result that was just and so forth, and you didn't really want to rip them off more than, because a lot of people, I mean, this was in a part of the country there were still people who couldn't read, because I can remember the judge who was mentoring me, we were doing a will or something, and he said, well, I want you to read this to whoever the man was, Mr. X, whatever it is, and I looked at him incredulously, and I said, well, it's his will, he should read it himself. And the judge said to him, he can't read. You have to read it to him and explain it, and he's going to sign it with an X. And that was like, complete shock to me, that would still be true at that time. But the legal profession has changed dramatically. And, the woman that you're writing about is a product of the very high pressure, bill by the, not by the hour, but by the minutes kind of practice. And so I thought she was really fascinating. And although she's a tough character, in the end, you have to have a lot of sympathy for her. At least I do. So, I think there's a two-track thing going on here. I mean, you're writing about the guys, and everything Ace so perceptively said is completely true. But you're also writing about a woman in extremity. And I think, and a victim in a way of her own lifestyle in the same way. Let's remember she's in San Francisco too, which has a whole different dynamic, than Jackson, Wyoming. And so I thought what was so interesting is how you took these two different components that were really an unlikely fit. And then you managed to bring them together. So I thought that was really genius.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And the other part, Nick, again, I think Barbara and I are just praising the book because we do it, it is such an unusual story and such a character-driven story, and just brought us right in a very human story. But that, I think, is obviously that's why you chose a place like Jackson Hole, because I've spent a little time in Telluride, and the levels of success and wealth is a bit grotesque, and where the people are living in ways that they can't even fathom somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck, or trying to put food on the table, or just trying to patch a house. And it is almost like a feudal system where what brought you, because of being somebody from Wisconsin, how did you center yourself? You mentioned earlier that you had spent some time in Jackson Hole or whatever, but I guess it could have been any of these type of communities where you had extreme wealth, wanting to live in amidst great beauty and great natural beauty.
But let me interpolate, Ace, and say that is less true in the East, because those communities are already built. So it tends to be more of a Western thing right now, because they're under development. You can't really go to, Darien, Connecticut, where all of that is already established. I mean, that's the same way that you can go to Jackson.
When I go to my private plane, I take off. I always go to, I've got a place right by Kanye West, Wyoming. So that's where we share that space right there.
Sure.
Chuck Box knows all about that. He sometimes let him into our gated community,
Yeah, I think part of the reason why 5 years passed between hearing the anecdote about all the meth in the world and writing the book, I needed that time to figure out what the setting was going to be. Because all my other books are set in Wisconsin. And but I didn't see this happening there. And you're a writer, so like, if you can up the ante somehow, you try to do that. And why would I construct a $2 million house in northern Wisconsin if I could construct a $20 million house in Wyoming? And then you think about winter coming. Well, I mean, winter's bad in Wisconsin, of course it is, but it's not the same as a road closing, basically, because there's so much snow. So that was important too, just thinking about ways of upping the ante. And I think the landscape there is it is more dramatic. I loved the disparities in wealth. I mean, that's upping the ante as well. So yeah, and then when we took that family trip out to Yellowstone and came through Jackson, I was like, this is the place.
Yeah.
This is what we're gonna do. And I was naive too, you know, you guys will laugh at me. Because I don't quite have my jet yet, or my gated community, but we went into Jackson and I'd never been there before. And I thought, oh, what a quaint ski town. Like maybe we wouldn't have to live in Eau Claire. Maybe we could come out here. And then I started looking at real estate listings and was like, who the hell how can anyone afford to live here?
Yeah.
And that was another thing that just sort of crystallized it for me. So
The first time I'd ever heard of Jackson Hole, when it got to be known as in the great classic Every Which Way But Loose with Clint Eastwood and the orangutan. Do you know what I'm talking about? That was when I first was aware of Jackson. And I guess it's always had that mystique of rich a-holes and locals and the conflict, but I thought it was the perfect place to set this book. Well, does Patrick have some questions?
He does, but I want to ask you one, Ace, before we call
Sure.
out Patrick. I've been trying to envision, can you construct a situation like this in Mississippi? I mean, Mississippi once, had plantations and, a very disparate social structure and so forth, but
I don't think so. Not in Mississippi. I mean, Mississippi, I think that your money goes a lot further here. And I think that there's, I don't think that the type of building like a castle and the idea of that extreme wealth, there is money here. There are people who have, but it tends to be more about the land than the house. It tends to be how many acres do you have, not necessarily, where you're living and what your address is or how you're constructing this house. So it did seem very Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, epic kind of place to be. But no, I don't think Mississippi we would have anything, not necessarily with this type of heightened reality, I guess.
I asked you that question because for a while I lived in East Tennessee, which is, a relatively poor area with a number of lakes because, TVA came through and did all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
and when I left it, it was still fairly poor and people didn't live in fancy houses or whatever. And when I went back there 20 some years later, I could hardly believe it.
yeah,
In North Carolina and East Tennessee, maybe a little bit of Virginia, attracted because of various laws and so forth, attracted a significant number of retirees or people who wanted second homes kind of in the country. And so really the edge of the Appalachians outside the Smokies National Park, let's say, are very much like Jackson Hole, or Jackson as it now is, where people could come and build these mega mansions and in a wilderness setting that had its own whole set of problems. And, I don't know what there is about the whole second home thing. I mean, I used to think it was just a British thing that, I've known British authors, for example, who, the minute they were successful, what they wanted to do was build a country estate because that was kind of like the symbol that, you had made it based on generations, centuries in England. But it's happening here now, and if you read the Wall Street Journal on Friday, you can hardly believe the mansion section. It just makes you gag. $55 million here, $90 million for a penthouse here, and all. And you think, who has that kind of money?
Well,
and what does it do if you are living in that kind of a bubble?
I think a second home in Mississippi tends to involve four-wheelers and shotguns. So
okay, well, I'm just warning you, development may be heading your way. You just
go mud riding and take your your four-wheeler out and that kind of thing. So it's a different kind of thing for the deep South. But I like I said, I spent some time in Telluride, and that's what I actually kept on envisioning when I was reading this book.
And we also can't discount the absolute stunning beauty around Jackson, Wyoming. I mean, it is a totally knockout place. And, maybe part of it is that people want to claim some of that view, some of that magnificence for themselves, You know,
Yeah.
I just drove through Moab and, you know, came down the Grand Canyon Riverway. And, you know, fortunately you can't really build there, but in Sedona, which is a version of that, there are people who've really begun to overbuild it in development because they want a chunk of that magnificent view, you know, to kind of own it. So who knows where it's all going. Patrick, come join us. You undoubtedly have many contributions to this discussion.
Well, I don't know about that, but let's see. There is a question here. Well, actually, Belinda, more of an observation. She says, isn't this happening in places like Asheville too,
Yes,
where rich people don't just visit the beautiful places, but want to have houses there now, which is just what Barbara, you were just saying.
absolutely. Asheville was part of that whole development thing that I was going on about, North Carolina, East Tennessee.
Yeah, there's that, you know, wanting to possess the beauty as if that can happen, you know.
Yeah, next time my friend David Joy joins you for a talk, he's very he's enamored with that part of the country and similar kind of, you know, issues of people moving in and changing the dynamics of what was there before and the culture and the people.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, we can say it's a Western thing, but it's just as true where David's living.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So, Patrick,
what's real estate like in Oxford, Ace? Is it crazy or is it?
It actually is crazy, and Oxford is a real bubble, a real oasis in Mississippi. So here it is, it's really insane, and there's a lot of the building is, you know, right now it's a weird time. Going back to Nick's book with construction, is the wood prices have gone so nuts,
Yeah.
and builders can't get plywood, and the cost of just getting timber right now is very, very expensive. So it's changing things. But the housing market here is very competitive. People are really snatching up properties, and it's a weird effect of COVID. And I think that's happening in a lot of places. But you know, I have to say, going back through your book, which I had read earlier in the year, and then revisiting, my wife and I have been thinking about building a house. So we've been talking about that, but I don't know, man. This is like a cautionary tale, man. I don't want these people on my job site. I don't want these people, you know.
Yeah.
I'll give them, if I would be the kind of guy like, take your time, man, take your time.
Yeah.
We don't want any meth here. We don't want the pressure, you know,
Yeah.
just slow and easy.
Yeah, and I think building, you know, when we built this house in 2014, look, you don't want to complain about building a house, right? But anybody who's ever built a house will tell you it's not very sexy. It's not fun. And I think when when the house was finished and we moved in, yeah, it was like beautiful and it meant something to me because it was largely paid for like after my first book sold. So that meant something to me. And I think it was like a fulfillment of my version of the American dream, you know, like this is my place, this is my vision. But I mean, I wasn't significantly happier. You know, I just took this big pile of money and we built a house. And then at the end of the day, it was like, well, I'm the same guy with all the same, you know, anxieties and everything that just moved into a different place. And it made me question my own values and my own notion of the American dream. Like, why hadn't we my wife and I are from the same place. We were from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. We both grew up in the same post-World War II American ranch style neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And I just kept thinking, like, why didn't we just move into that neighborhood? You know? And it's like it's a sort of wisdom that you can only get after you've made the mistake. But I also think it says something about where we are as a country, that so many people are doing this. And I think some of it's like, they're unhappy within, so they think like a new house is gonna fix it, and it doesn't fix anything.
Yeah, we're such a consumer culture, bigger, better, everything. There's a good friend of mine moved into a house here recently, and he had to in a very modest house, you know, 5 bedrooms, whatever. but he had to remove 17 television sets that had been placed all around the property that had been bolted into the walls, which is just insane to me. But the excess that we get into, and that's the great stuff with storytelling, and with your book and the type of stories we can talk about the differences in the have and the have-nots, and the grotesque excess and waste, and what we're trying to do. And it's a shame we really can't talk about the ending, but there is a bittersweet moment of what did this all mean? Was this worth the effort? Was this ultimately satisfactory for everyone who's involved? And but again, I'm just glad it had such a happy ending, and everyone just on the mountaintop they all hugged, and the rainbow came out, and I don't want to give anything away, but it's just just was burst into song. It was very lovely.
Nick, does your place have any kind of solar setup, or is that a thing in Wisconsin?
We have geothermal here, but we don't have solar. I'd love to have solar, but well, that's the other thing about a house, man, everything costs money, right? I mean, so
that's one thing that's kind of cool about, obviously being out here. We have rooftop solar, and every month we get this little statement saying, you have offset the equivalent of, 15 trees this month. And it's like, wow, that's cool.
It is cool.
Yeah. I actually have a really good question from Belinda again. And she says, how did you decide to use the construction worker's perspective rather than the poor person's perspective that's losing their home?
Well, I'm not sure I totally understand the question. Who's losing their home?
Maybe she's just interpolating from what she's heard from the discussion. Well, how about just how did you decide to use the construction worker's perspective?
Yeah, well, I knew this wasn't going to be a first person narrative. I saw it as being kind of a close third person. The characters are important to me, and the characters do develop over the course of the plot, but compared to other books that I've written where you really get deep into the character, I knew this wasn't going to be quite as deep as that. So I just kind of liked having the camera move from character to character, chapter to chapter. And I liked what Barbara had to say about Gretchen, because the guys are at the sort of center of the action, but you don't really understand the tragedy of the book unless you read Gretchen's backstory. And then you understand exactly why the house is being built where it is, why windows need to be situated where they are. And, my editor, Sally Kim, kind of helped me deepen that too. She felt like there had to be another sort of reason for the house to be where it was. And so she kind of helped me unlock some of that, dig a little deeper there, but yeah.
Well, this is a book you really have to read it all the way to the end to really understand the book. And, it's frustrating to be talking about it when we can't really divulge that. Well, we could, but then, you'd all be pissed at us. So
Right. I mean,
don't listen to Ace, professional liar. Tell you rainbows.
I think the main thing that people do need to know about the book, though, is it's a hell of a fun read. And, I think when we, not getting too down on the details of the darkness that happens and everything happens, it's a highly addictive story that it's very, as Barbara and I both have talked about, it really pulls you in. And it's not a traditional thriller or whodunit, whatever. It is what you're talking about. It's about building the house, but why is the house being built? How are things going to come about? How are these guys going to pull this thing off? Are they going to, what's going to happen? And it's just, you can't stop it, but I think that the best novels really are that way. I get very frustrated when I hear people say, well, the difference between literature and pop, culture or whatever is that books should be difficult and they should not be, addictive. They shouldn't draw you in. The pacing should be, and I think that's just not true. I think that some of my favorite books, The Great Gatsby, is a highly addictive read. I think I was talking to someone the other day about East of Eden. I said, it's like days of our lives. It's like a soap opera. You can't put it down. You're just so I think it's sometimes a laziness factor for some writers saying that good books have to be boring, because I think that's absolutely not true.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, what a good grief. Well, I mean, we're here because of a bookstore, an independent bookstore. And I don't think booksellers really like get enthused to sell boring books, or books that aren't page turners, you know what I mean? And also I don't know, I like something that you said earlier, which was there's a certain amount of mysteries or thrillers where, like, for me, like the villain unmasks themselves 80% of the way through the action and then proceeds to tell you about the whole journey that you've just taken and all the details that were omitted throughout the narrative. And I like that you sort of talked about that too. I mean, I didn't want to write a book like that at all. I'd much rather get to the end of the book and have a lot of unresolved issues, but trust my reader to be smart enough to figure it out too. I mean, like, I was talking about Deliverance earlier today, which to me is a great literary thriller. And you get to the end of Deliverance and it's kind of like the story could have just begun. Like, the guys have committed murders, there's bodies out there. They're totally, you know, they probably have PTSD from what they've just suffered, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, the book ends.
And the book is about everything. It's a journey down the river, but it's about time and history and play. It's one of the best. That's one of the best novels I've ever read in my entire life. James, I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
Patrick,
I'm at a disadvantage because I haven't read the book yet, but it sounds fantastic. And
You would love it, Patrick.
yeah,
I'll bring you my copy here.
that'd be great. Yeah, and I love B. Traven too, and you don't hear that name mentioned often enough anymore.
No, you don't. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to, you know, I'm sure Ace thinks about this too, but like, you know, you're going to dedicate a book to your mom and your dad. You're going to dedicate a book to your brother and your best friends. And sometimes, you know, I'm 5 books into things now. I'm sort of like, okay, well, who is this one to? And because it's more of a thriller, I didn't really know who I wanted to give it to. And then I thought, you know, imagine a guy like B. Traven existing in 2021. People don't even really know like how he died or where he's buried or who he even really was. And now there's so much pressure on writers to be on every social media platform and to be kind of performative in some sort of way. And he couldn't have existed, you know?
Yeah. There was a great book. Wasn't there a book, In Search of B. Traven, that came out? I know you read that, Patrick, didn't you? I haven't read it, but how was it?
It was pretty good. I mean, there have been a handful of them that have, you know, proposed different theories.
Yeah.
Some of them are kind of crazy, but it's fun to imagine him and Ambrose Bierce hanging out together down in Mexico.
Somewhere in Baja or
Mexico,
Guadalajara or somewhere, right?
Yeah.
A lot of touches of that in next book for sure.
Thanks.
Well, that's a really good question. Let me ask you, what is it you're thinking about writing next? Because this is a book that won't have a sequel. So you must be already turning over some other idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I've just been so fortunate in my career to be able to write the stories that I want to write every single time. You know, this was kind of a departure for me, but I was telling my wife about the plot and she's like, yeah, you should totally go for that. And I was also thinking about one of my writing teachers, James Allen McPherson, who always said, like, you just have to do what's right for the story. And I think he really thought of books and storytelling in a sort of spiritual way, like that writers were conduits for stories. And so, yeah, I'm really proud of the book, but I don't know what's next, you know. And it's funny, I mean, I have an idea for a sequel to this book. I don't know if anybody really cares to read it or not, but I could see that there's ways to open it back up a little bit.
I can tell you, I don't want to steal anything from you, but just think about it. They're going to add an extra garage, and that's the whole thing. Is there's going to be they're going to put a pool in. That's what it is. The whole thing is about the pool. Okay, you can take it. I don't need any credit, but it's
they only have 45 minutes to build the pool.
And they're given,
That's
they're given spoons. That's all they got.
Yeah.
Spoons and
Spoons,
45
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll
Start-
steal
start
that.
digging.
Tick, tick, tick,
Watch
tick.
this.
I
And
love it.
Nick's gonna end up getting a movie deal off this, you know, and then I'm gonna be so mad because it was my idea.
They start digging and they find a body, you know.
Yeah, there, hey,
Yeah.
there we go. Patrick's adding to it. I don't know.
Actually, I think it would make an extremely interesting movie. But let me ask Ace this question. So what is it that we have coming up next with you, Mr. Atkins?
What do I have coming out? I am working on the final bit of my 10th Spencer novel, and that'll be out in January. So I'm in the, you know, you're only as good as the next effort. So it's like, you know, I have a book out called The Heathens. It's been out for 2 weeks, but I'm on deadline right now to finish the new Spencer. So that's what I'm into.
That's incredible. It really is the 10th one. God,
It
it
is.
feels like you just started it.
Number 10, and the number 50,
Wow.
number 50 overall. So
50?
yep, number 50.
And you're only 28. I mean, this
know.
is so impressive.
I know. I you know, I don't want to brag on myself, but I've been, you know, I was just a prodigy. I
Started
just,
at 6 months going babble, babble, and it went on from there.
before puberty, I was writing hard-boiled detectives.
Love it. Too funny. Anything else there, Patrick?
Let's see. Not a question, but somebody named Brett says that he says, I worked at a gift shop in Jackson, very much like you described it, but this was the 1970s. So more of just an observation.
Mhm.
Okay.
It was the
Yeah.
70s, it would have been cocaine, right? It would have been cocaine instead of meth. How did you get into you said you watched like videos, and did you talk to any people who had been addicts? Because I can tell, I'm just going to, again, spoiler alert, after reading this book, I don't want to try meth. That's just, I right off, I was like, this is not healthy.
Yeah.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did a lot of research into meth. I didn't want to try it. I've got a lovely wife and a good life and 2 small kids and a slightly addictive personality to begin with, so that didn't seem like a good idea. But I talked to a couple of people who had used it, and it was really interesting to me because we think of the drug as only really behaving one way, or like the folks that use meth only look one way. You know, they all look like meth heads, or the drug, you know, forces everybody to, but drugs don't affect everybody the same way. You know, there's people that are using meth that are attorneys and doctors and professors. And some people can quit it and other people can't quit it. But I talked to a guy who used it, and he gave me a description of how it affected him. And then I held that in my head, and I did try to, like, you know, you were talking about drinking coffee, Ace. I just drank a ton of coffee and tried to get my heart rate going. And then I got that idea of his sensation in my head. And sometimes I would listen to a particular kind of music that sort of, you know, achieved that feeling too. And yeah.
Did it make you, Nick, did it make you crazy at times when you're writing this, where you got so deep into the character and the scenario? Did you feel like you were coming a little bit unhinged? Did your wife at some point say, hey man, you know, slow down? Did you have moments like that?
You know, I think the biggest thing was, like, the last book that I wrote was called Little Faith. It was about my father-in-law. It's a really, like, earnest book about, you know, rural Wisconsin and faith and love and family. And when I was writing that book, I was filled with just like positive emotions. It was a fun book. It meant a lot to me because it was about people that I knew. When I was writing Godspeed, oftentimes I just felt kind of dirty, you know, because I was under this self-imposed deadline. It felt like all I was thinking about was time and money and meth, and you know what it's like. I mean, you're living in your head with these imaginary people and these sensations, and it becomes part of you. And
Yeah, and
So
if you're not, then you're not doing it right. If you're not fully invested, if you're doing it and your brain is on something else and you're not totally invested, then the reader's not going to get involved in it either. So did you
Yeah.
shower though, at least, Nick? Did you shower during this process?
Not much, only when my wife asked me to. I wore the same, well, you know, just dusty work
Yeah.
paint splattered my arms. And yeah, I've got thick arm hair and it was just coated with drywall dust and paint. And
Well, there's a great scene in the end of the book where one of the characters has really been put through the ringer, and they just want to get him into the hot springs just to get him cleaned off, just to get the funk off of him. But
yeah,
all that stuff was so deep in the story that you felt grimy, you felt part of it.
yeah.
So
Yeah, you can't see my office floor, but there's just nothing but Mountain Dew bottles here stacked about 2.5 feet deep.
Oh, we're definitely going to have to get you together with David Troy. I can see it coming. So I have one final question. Tell us about the title. Did you come up with Godspeed, or did Putnam come up with Godspeed? And what does it say to you about your book?
Yeah. Well, the original title was All the Meth in the World, but I don't believe that anyone would have published that book. But I love that. I mean, that's kind of how I think about the book.
Was that really the original title?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's just, you know, large segments of the population that are never, ever, ever, ever going to buy a book with meth in the title.
But yet there's a whole different group of people here in Mississippi where you have bestseller. So it just, you know, it could go either way for you.
Yeah. I got to give credit to my agent, Rob McQuilkin. I think he came up with the suggestion for Godspeed, and I think it's a great title. You know, when you're writing your book, you know, you put your title on your Word document or whatever, and it's a little bit like naming a kid. That's definitely how you're thinking of it. You know, it's got to be all the meth in the world, all the meth in the world. You become more convinced of it the deeper you go into your project. But publishing is also like a collaborative effort, and you know, hopefully you're trying to sell some books too. And I remember a story about Toni Morrison, like not being able to choose the title of her own book. The publishers wouldn't let her go with whatever it was. They renamed it. Yeah, my agent, Rob McQuilkin, great guy, came up with Godspeed, and I like it. I mean, it's sort of a salutation, meaning, you know, good luck, but it also has, you know, speed in the title. So it feels a little dirty too in this context.
Well, thank you. I think it's an excellent title too. And since I can't imagine how you would actually pictorially represent this book, I think that the cover, you know, does a decent job with that as well. Anyway, you know, it's an unclassifiable book, but if you trust Ace or trust me or soon to trust Patrick, I think that many of you will love it. It's an original story. It's propulsive and surprising. And at the same time, it says really important things about society. And, you know, one of the reasons that I have read crime fiction almost exclusively my whole life is I like learning things. I absolutely love learning things. And you can do that in fiction in a way that's quite different from nonfiction. Part of it, I think, is the emotion of the story cements it better in your head, you know, than if you're just reading an accumulation of data, statistics, whatever it might happen to be. So there's a lot to learn in your book. And that makes it extra special. Ace, thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this with us. And Nickolas, real pleasure to do an event with you. Don't forget The Heathens, which is fabulous. Patrick, say something about The Heathens, because I know that you and Ace did a program recently about it. Give us a 1-minute pitch.
It'll make you laugh. It'll make you cry.
It's got a great 80s hair metal soundtrack.
It actually does.
No, it's a blast, you know. And what I wanted to ask you quickly, Ace, was how are you going to continue with these titles? Are you running out of names for, you know, poor people?
No, I'm not going to. I want to get to the point with the Quinn Colson books where I get to the geriatric, and when I get to finally with the title, the geriatric, that's when I know I really, really have something. Fortunately, they let me choose these last few titles. So in the very beginning, there was a lot of, same thing with titles. I had very different ideas in mind of how I thought of the book, and then the titles would change at the last minute, and you still think about those titles. So I understand that, but fortunately, they're letting me use some of the crazier titles right now, like the Revelators and the Heathens, and those really Southern words. But yeah.
What are some of the ones you have in the list? Like the Infidels,
Yeah.
That's not a bad one. Actually.
No, it's not bad at all. That's actually, I thought, I was like, have you been looking at my have you been breaking into my computer, Patrick? There's titles like that. But yeah, no, I think that there's always time to get the thesaurus out and come up with some title for these books.
Awesome. That's great.
I'm glad you're still having so much fun with this, Ace, because you clearly are.
Oh, for doing the talks?
No, just for everything, for, writing, for publishing, for doing your books, for, you've always had a tremendous amount of energy, and you're a big, strong guy, but you always have, I think I've always gotten an impression from you about how much fun you're having.
Well, you gotta love this. And I think it's the same thing. I used to work in a bookstore too, Nick, and I was just obsessed with wanting to be in this business and to be around it. And I got to meet Patrick 20 years ago. He was the first person who, read my book. Like I said, there was like 10 people who read that first novel. And, I was drawn to it. I was drawn to that world of writing. And I think that there are sometimes, they get into it for the wrong reasons. They get into it because they want to be authors, or they want to, I don't know whatever, they're wrong about it. But if you look behind me, I've got Dell paperbacks from the 40s, and my favorite titles, and Elmore Leonard and Bob Parker and all that stuff. And this is where business I always wanted to be in. And I think it was the same thing for you, Nick, is when you were working and you were trying to learn about the business, trying to learn about authors and get into it. It's just, it's something, it's a calling, but yet it's it's something you're really compelled to do. And once, I think we're all four of us are very fortunate to be able to be in this business. And if it's not fun, there's a lot better ways of making money than being in the book business. I mean, I would be in construction, I would be in something else, but the book business is not the path to choose for, financial success. It's just something you love.
Genteel poverty.
Okay, Patrick, I'm going to trot out. Patrick once wrote to me that he felt he was no longer suited for regular employment.
Yeah, probably unemployable.
So fortunately, we've been able to make a financial success out of the poison pen. So, it's carrying on, but we also have a wonderful time with it. And we do a lot of things that are not geared towards making money, not geared towards financial success, but somehow it seems to come anyway. So, so we're really fortunate in that, but we couldn't do it if you guys weren't so supportive and willing to autograph books and come talk to us and all that. So our success is all about you. So thank you both very, very much. It's been a real pleasure, Nick, to talk to you. As always, Ace, fabulous. I hope everybody buys a copy of Godspeed. We do have autographed ones, as we've said. And we'll have a podcast tomorrow, and the video will stay on Facebook forever. So if you've enjoyed this, you can recommend both of those to friends, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Barbara. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good night.
Bye.